At precisely 3 minutes past the hour, the royal silence was broken not with ceremony or tradition, but with a confirmation so stark and carefully restrained that it immediately sent shockwaves across Britain and beyond. This was not about succession or scandal. It was about a child, Prince Louis, and the way Prince William and Princess Catherine stepped forward together conveyed everything before a single word was fully understood. Buckingham Palace did not hold a grand press briefing or issue a pre-announcement. Instead, a single, concise notification appeared across official royal platforms. Though under 100 words, each carried an almost unbearable gravity. The timing 3 minutes past the hour was no accident. Royal watchers know that when announcements deviate from pattern, it often signals that something significant has occurred behind the scenes. What truly stunned observers, however, was not merely the content of the message, but who delivered it. For the first time in recent memory, the palace allowed the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge to issue the statement themselves, not through a spokesperson or official herald, but as parents, two individuals breaking through the layers of royal formality to speak directly to the public. Directly addressing the world, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge made a seismic impact. Their tone was measured but unmistakably somber, neither panicked nor hopeful, but carrying a heavy sense of acceptance. Phrases like deeply personal, grateful for understanding, and ongoing support painted a far bleaker picture than they could openly state. The public, attuned to the coded language of the monarchy, read between every carefully chosen line. Something was terribly wrong with Prince Louis. They weren't merely requesting space, they were pleading. Within minutes, news anchors stumbled over scripts, and seasoned royal correspondents appeared visibly shaken, some admitting they had never witnessed anything like it. Social media erupted, with shockwaves spreading from the UK across Europe, Australia, Canada, and the United States. This wasn't just news. It was a rupture in the carefully managed image of the royal household. Comparisons quickly emerged. Veteran commentators recalled the announcements of Princess Diana's death, the stillness, the disbelief, the sudden vacuum of information. Others thought of the Queen's passing, when time itself seemed to pause. Yet this felt different. This wasn't the loss of an era or a figurehead. It was about a boy, a child whose charm once lit up official appearances, now reduced to a name in a heartbreaking statement. The haunting element was not just the sadness but the finality. The words conveyed a gravity reserved for irreversible circumstances, leaving Britain collectively holding its breath and beginning to grieve, not because the full truth was known, but because the public feared it already understood. Behind the statement, palace insiders recognized an even deeper gravity. What William and Catherine were still holding back. Designed to calm, royal statements typically reassure, but this one unsettled. Every sentence seemed weighed down by omission. Analysts noted the pauses, the softened phrasing, and the conspicuous absence of reassurance. This was not the language of hope, but of preparation. Within minutes, seasoned observers were asking the most frightening question. What were William and Catherine not ready to say out loud? In the immediate aftermath, newsrooms dissected not only what was said but precisely how it was said. The tone, muted and mournful, spoke louder than the words themselves. Gone were the polished phrases of reassurance. There were no timelines, no promises of a return to normal, no comforting statements about expected recovery or current well-being. Instead, the message hovered in a state of suspended emotion, calm on the surface but deeply unsettling underneath. Every word seemed the result of long, painful deliberation. Insiders reported that palace aides spent hours redrafting the statement, pausing between sentences, fully aware of the weight each word would carry. They were not simply issuing a press release. They were preparing the public for something irreversible. The careful omission of medical terms, doctors' names, or even the phrase health issue spoke volumes. It was less an effort at clarity than a quiet surrender to circumstances beyond control. Most striking, however, was what wasn't said. There was no mention of when Prince Louis might be seen again in public, no hint of returning to school or future events with his siblings. The absence of projection made it clear this wasn't a temporary delay, it was a derailment. Behind closed doors, whispers suggested this crisis had been brewing far longer than anyone realized. Journalists revisited footage of Prince Louis, noting smiles that once seemed playful now looked forced, childhood mischief reinterpreted as signs of something deeper, and subtle interactions between William, Catherine, and Louis taking on new meaning. The public was not the only one caught off guard. Some palace staff reportedly learned of the full scope only hours before the statement's release, their shock and grief raw, unperformed. It wasn't just about a child in distress, it was the collapse of an illusion that the youngest royals, shielded by security and routine, were immune to the struggles of real life. Most devastatingly, there was the creeping awareness that this was not temporary. This was not a momentary interruption in royal life. It was the quiet beginning of something permanent. A preparation, not an announcement of final loss. The royal facade had cracked, revealing two parents desperately trying to delay the inevitable exposure of a pain they could no longer contain. Breaking centuries of royal instinct, Prince William did the unthinkable. He spoke from the heart, not the institution. There was no script, no podium, no shield of formality. He spoke not as a future king but as a father, unraveling in real time. His voice faltered, his composure wavered, and the monarchy's most carefully guarded illusion collapsed. Grief, fear, and helplessness were laid bare for the world to witness. The moment William stepped into the spotlight, it became clear this was not a speech but a confession. Gone was the poised, steady air. In its place was a man struggling to contain emotions long simmering beneath the surface. He opened not with pleasantries or thanks, but with 6 words that brought a nation to a standstill. I should have seen it sooner. In that admission, decades of royal distance dissolved. William recounted months of quiet tension at home, how Louis had grown quieter and more withdrawn, initially dismissed as a phase. He admitted palace life with all its rituals and obligations had masked what was happening at home, and that the signs became easier, not harder, to overlook. Beneath the candor lay the weight of his guilt. Nights spent pacing corridors, wondering how he could be so attuned to national affairs yet blind to his son's pain. He recalled moments when Louis asked to skip family engagements, when his laughter seemed rehearsed, and when his once wonder-filled eyes appeared hollow. One memory shattered him entirely. Louis's whispered question, "Do I have to smile when I don't feel it?" A plea that cut deeper than any royal crisis, revealing a child drowning in unspoken expectations. William confessed that this revelation nearly destroyed him and described the emotional toll on his marriage, his role as a father, and the dynamic between George, Charlotte, and Louis. The household's balance had shifted. Catherine struggled to hold it together, George had grown more serious, and Charlotte watched Louis with a worry mirroring her mother's. Perhaps the most devastating truth was that in attempting to shield Louis from the world, they had isolated him. William said plainly, "In our effort to shield him from the world, we built walls that even we couldn't see through." For the first time, the world witnessed the collision of royal duty and parental instinct laid bare, a moment of raw humanity that no ceremony could ever conceal. While William spoke publicly, another child was quietly breaking behind closed doors. Princess Charlotte, never meant to bear such weight, stepped into the emotional void left by Louis's retreat, absorbing fear she couldn't understand and protecting pain she couldn't fix. When her own strength finally cracked, Catherine realized the tragedy wasn't confined to one child, it was silently spreading through the family. In the early days of Louis's struggles, Charlotte remained the steady presence, holding his hand at public events, whispering to him when cameras turned away, standing closer than necessary. Many assumed it was simply sibling closeness, but in truth, Charlotte had begun carrying what no child should, the burden of her brother's unspoken suffering. She became his translator, his shadow, his unseen shield. Weeks after William's confession, Charlotte's internal collapse surfaced. Catherine recalled a quiet Sunday afternoon when Charlotte suddenly refused to speak, not in rebellion or anger, but from emotional exhaustion. Curled into herself, eyes distant, she whispered the words no parent forgets, "I didn't want you to worry more." That sentence pierced deeper than any headline, confirming Catherine's fear. The children were no longer just affected, they were managing the crisis, shielding their parents from pain, and in doing so had become casualties themselves. Louis had almost entirely withdrawn from daily life, no longer asking about friends, staying up late, or laughing at the small joys of childhood. Charlotte tried each day to rekindle that spark through games, songs, and quiet companionship, but slowly, she too was slipping. Within the palace, where duty often outruns emotion, no one had truly grasped how silence was consuming the family. There were no loud fights, no visible chaos, just a slow suffocation of feeling. Charlotte's collapse was the loudest cry they had received, expressed not through tears or tantrums but through stillness. That was when Catherine realized they hadn't just missed Louis's pain, they had missed its echo reverberating through every room of the home. The crisis had quietly spread, pulling at the bonds between siblings, parents, and even the structure of royal routine. Silence had been their enemy all along, and it was no longer sustainable. The moment that confirmed the breaking point came when Louis vanished from daily life entirely. What should have been an ordinary morning passed without him arriving, marking a turning point no one could ignore. Louis's absence from school, public appearances, and daily life marked a drastic decision that would permanently alter his childhood. The monarchy quietly removed its youngest member from public view, and the reasons were far more serious than anyone realized. For a child whose cheeky waves and playful smiles had captivated millions, the abrupt disappearance was deeply felt. Parents at his school received hushed notices, classmates were told he would learn from home, and the media, though restrained, watched the blackout with suspicion. Insiders later cited a specific incident at school as the breaking point, emotional, not physical or disciplinary, which left Louis unable to re-engage. Catherine realized in that moment that the outside world was no longer safe for her son emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. Within hours, the family retreated, holding emergency meetings and confronting the painful truth that tradition and public expectation could no longer protect him. The pressure to perform, to smile, wave, and behave as a polished royal child had become poisonous and had to stop. In a decision unprecedented in modern royal memory, William and Catherine removed Louis from public life without illness, scandal, or explanation. No tours, no Balmoral summer, no staged farewell, relying on silence as protection. Behind the scenes, the emotional weight of the choice was crushing. Louis did not resist, but he did not ask why, and his quiet resignation broke Catherine. The once spirited child had become careful, guarded, almost detached. Experts assessing the emotional toll warned of long-term impacts if royal expectations continued in private, even without public scrutiny. What haunted William and Catherine was not simply missing the signs earlier, but the fear that every attempt to raise their children in a balanced, normal environment had backfired, because even their version of normal was rooted in protocol, legacy, and public duty. They were left to confront the possibility that Louis's very identity, shaped by birthright, was the source of his suffering. As the family retreated inward, another figure quietly emerged, one who understood the cost of royal life in ways few others could. Under intense pressure, Princess Anne acted where others hesitated. No press, no permission, just instinct. She recognized the pattern, the silence, and the damage, and refused to let history repeat itself. What she offered Prince Louis wasn't treatment wrapped in protocol, but something radical within the monarchy: normalcy. While bureaucrats debated optics, advisors tiptoed around language, and strategists worried about precedent, and asked the only question that mattered: what would actually help the child? She called William, not as a royal, not as a counselor, but as a sister who had witnessed the monarchy's emotional cost and buried too many regrets. The conversation shattered protocol, and didn't seek permission. She gave direction, insisting Louis be removed from the suffocating routines and expectations stifling his spirit. The solution wasn't media statements or meetings, it was simplicity. Under her guidance, Louis was quietly moved to a space where royal titles meant nothing and responsibilities were real. Feeding animals, walking outdoors, and performing simple chores, not as punishment, but as grounding. And stripped away the pressures of public life and replaced them with freedom without spectacle. She knew what she was doing, having lived through Diana's struggles, Harry's rebellion, and William's internalization of pressure. Slowly, Louis began to speak more, eat with ease, and focus his gaze again. There were no staged breakthroughs, just small signs of reawakening. Asking questions, smiling for himself, not the cameras. And kept it all private, despite palace discomfort at her unorthodox approach, believing responsibility mattered more than roles. Yet as Louis healed, darker forces stirred within the palace. A confidential memo detonated internally, cold, strategic, and terrifying. It didn't speak of healing, only optics, containment, and risk management. When William saw it, he realized that, to some, his son was a problem to manage, not a child to protect. Drafted behind closed doors, circulated among senior aides, and marked highly confidential, the document framed Louis in terms of reputational volatility, visibility, exposure, and containment strategy. There was no mention of his emotional state or suffering, only bullet points on minimizing public questions, redirecting attention, and even suggesting that long-term invisibility might be the most stabilizing path. It wasn't a plan for healing, it was a bureaucratic strategy, coldly detached from the child it concerned. The memo was a blueprint for erasure, and William's reaction was immediate and volcanic. A man trained in discipline and composure, he stunned even his closest aides with the fury that followed. He reportedly stormed out of the room, memo in hand, demanding to know who had authorized it, shouting that his son was not a headline to manage and that the family had already buried too many truths behind silence. Catherine's response was no less intense, but where William's rage shook walls, hers cut with precision. She walked into the offices of senior advisors, placed the printed memo on the table, and asked quietly but firmly, Would you speak this way if it were your child? There was no answer. Princess Anne, upon learning of the memo, refused to let it slide. The steady force holding the family's emotional center, she now saw what she had long suspected. Parts of the institution still placed legacy above life, and didn't just express outrage. She made calls, demanded accountability, and publicly stood by William and Catherine in what many described as the most unfiltered show of familial unity the modern monarchy had ever witnessed. Yet the damage was done. The memo was leaked to the press, and when excerpts were published, backlash was instantaneous. Headlines condemned the palace's insensitivity, mental health organizations issued scathing statements, and social media erupted with anger, disbelief, and support for the Wales family. For the first time in decades, the royal institution faced public scrutiny it could neither fully control nor contain. The palace found itself not defending against scandal, but against its own soulless machinery. This wasn't just a PR disaster, it was a moral collapse, and the public saw it for what it was. An institution attempting to silence a child for the sake of tradition. What they hadn't anticipated was the tidal wave of fury that followed, now that the veil had been lifted and the nation refused to look away. With trust shattered and outrage mounting, the palace was forced to do what it had avoided for generations. In a statement unlike any before it, Buckingham Palace admitted the unthinkable. Prince Louis was receiving ongoing emotional recovery support. No euphemisms, no deflection, just truth. In a single sentence, centuries of royal invulnerability collapsed, and the public response was overwhelming. The announcement was quiet, almost humble, yet seismic. For the first time in modern memory, Buckingham Palace acknowledged vulnerability in a royal child without filters or spin. The words were direct. Louis was in recovery, receiving continued emotional care, and the family was asking not for privacy, but understanding. The public was stunned not only by the message but by who had shaped it. Catherine. Her fingerprints were unmistakable. Within hours, a second note followed, handwritten by the Princess of Wales, deeply personal. Speaking as a mother, not a royal, she thanked the nation for its patience, acknowledged the difficulty of silence, and wrote simply, "Some truths are too delicate to share until they're ready to be held." In that moment, the crowd outside the gates wasn't holding up phones, they were holding their breath. The ripple effect was immediate and global. Messages poured in from parents, teachers, doctors, and anyone who had walked the tightrope between silence and fear, isolation and recovery. Hashtags trended, mental health organizations praised the family's courage, and campaigns for child emotional awareness surged. Suddenly, Louis wasn't just a prince. He was a symbol, a reminder that even those born into unimaginable privilege are not immune to emotional pain. And with that, a legacy long buried within the monarchy began to resurface, that of Diana. Comparisons flooded the media, not in scandal, but in empathy. Decades earlier, Diana had spoken of eating disorders, postpartum depression, and emotional neglect within royal walls, criticized then, but now recognized as prescient. Even punished in the past, Diana's honesty was now being reframed not as weakness, but as foresight, and in many ways, Louis' story picked up where hers had left off. This time, the institution didn't silence it, it surrendered to it. The definition of royal strength began to change before the public's eyes, not in speeches or ceremonies, but in truth. The kind that hurts, the kind that heals. Strength was no longer measured in poise but in the ability to say, "We're not okay, and we're doing something about it." For the first time in decades, the monarchy looked less like a castle and more like a family, flawed, fractured, trying. Yet it wasn't a statement or speech that truly changed everything. It was a photograph. Prince Louis beside his mother, hands in the soil, planting something new. No crowns, no distance, just healing. The image traveled faster than any headline, silencing critics and rewriting the narrative from tragedy to courage. Shared first by a charity linked to Catherine's mental health work and quietly reshared by royal channels. It needed no explanation. The world understood immediately. This wasn't a PR maneuver. Louis, once vanished from public view, was being seen as he truly was: human, growing, healing. The response was unlike anything the palace had seen. News anchors choked up, social media reflected instead of reacted, and focus shifted from royal titles to the boy himself. Grounded in reality, he became a mirror for every child struggling under expectations and every family learning too late the cost of silence. His pain wasn't erased, but his resilience was acknowledged. Mental health organizations praised the image as a turning point. Schools held discussions, parents shared stories, and across Britain and beyond, families saw not royalty, but reality. The photo forced a reckoning within the institution itself. Vulnerability, long treated as a liability, was now redefined as courage, passed down from Diana to Catherine, now embodied in Louis. For once, the crown wasn't shining under the weight of perfection, it was softened by truth. That quiet shift marked the beginning of something new. A monarchy willing to speak in human terms, to learn in public, and to bend toward compassion instead of concealment. Louis's story, once whispered with dread, had become a reason to believe change was possible. And as the world watched this family move forward, one truth lingered. This wasn't just tragic news about Prince Louis, it was a moment that forever changed how the monarchy confronts pain, love, and humanity.